it's like, how should these writings be distinct and like related specifically to the person I'm writing to, and what is the purpose of my contact, versus like how much is it like a matter of writing like a universal or like a specific essay or series of essays. And so this gets to this whole challenge where it's like, for one thing, like writing tends to be hard for me, like to get the process going. And this is a whole thing to analyze really and discuss, because I mean, a lot of people, it's like, what is writing? How does it work? Like, I mean, it's kind of a mysterious thing. Like, words come out of you, and it's like, where do they come from? And I mean, that's a whole thing to talk about, really. And again, using myself as an example of like having like some skill in writing, but also having it very fragmented and broken down in terms of like, and like the fact that I really require an effective prompt to like spit out writing, and and it's also, I mean, part of my whole approach is, for one thing, my own experience with reading is such that I often haven't read all that much, and I skim, and then I like look at words or sentences or paragraphs, but then it's like I get the point, and then it's kind of like, well, like I can surf and skim at times, whether it's neuroscience articles, psychology articles, all kinds of different things, but it's like, what is the significance of them, or how do they tie together? And then this is where like sketching things out on paper and showing associations between words and concepts and people and ideas, or pulling things together into these layouts, has been like part of this process of like, it's like a kind of visual language almost, because it's like, of all the different words and all the different books, it's like, what are the real kind of connections and associations, and then what can be done with those, and then how does this relate to presenting information to people who have short attention spans or whatever, which is something my brother referenced yesterday. And then this gets into this question of how attention works, and the idea of learning how to focus one's attention, which gets into Tim Ryan's book, A Mindful Nation, and his video where he talks about being told to pay attention in school, but not taught how to learn to focus one's attention. And this is the same thing, I think, with things like math and writing and just learning in general. And it's like, even if the goal is to memorize, how do you actually do that? And if the goal is to like reply to prompts, how do you actually do that? And what's the point in terms of neurophysiological development, aka learning? Again, even if it's, whether it's memorization or high level thinking or learning to do calculations, how does that work, and how does that relate to motivation and people being motivated to learn something with some level of intrinsic motivation, where the framework is not just about getting the grade, but it's like, it's about like actually building yourself up, and then how can evaluation and assessment better be done to like line up with that goal. And this gets into the whole thing of feedback, and again, it's like Boris Saxberg kind of comes to mind, and a number of different people. And this is where this gets into that like new.edu, and like how that's set up, and it's like you log in, and it's like, there's something about it that just doesn't really fit with like how I process information. And it's like, this is something to like discuss and talk about. How do people process information? How does this relate to like time management and thinking about what's important versus urgent, the whole 7 habits thing? And it's like, how is that whole 7 habits thing related to like one's active learning process and life workflow, including financial workflow. And then this ties back around into this concept of one's overall like financial picture, like especially like concept of lifespan earnings, lifespan time expenditures and experiences that it adds up to. And then it's like in particular scenes, what's happening, how does one make sense of a given scene, and that whole thing. On to like the idea of possessions and hoarding and buying and selling, and what's a book worth, why is a certain book worth a certain amount, how much are things like placeholder references or decorations versus something that's an actual learning product, what are the key ideas in a given book, do you really even need the book. And that includes some of these books like from Vital Smarts or even Seven Habits. It's like, again, like a lot of people don't read books all the way through, and it's kind of like, how can things be presented? And so this gets into things like SlideShare or YouTube videos. But again, how can a structure or framework be built where even with like SlideShare, RSS feeds, or reading news articles, how does reading the article relate to like relating this to one's knowledge and thinking about what are the implications of it and like maybe taking notes? And then it's like the idea of a learning journal or personal journal, life journal, and then it's like Artist Way morning pages, Screenstorming, the whole video recording thing. And then this gets into like accountability, including accountability circles, which gets into uncollege and the discussion there and school survival. But also, how does that relate to general lifespan accountability and accountability to other people, like in terms of rent and other priorities and people's interests, and the interests of people in one's life and how those relate to one's own personal interests, and like rules to live by kind of a thing. And then this gets into like, where did I go wrong at different points, and how can other people be given better tools to like navigate freedom and the relationship between freedom and different types of obligations that one has to others or the situations one's in. And then that gets into this whole pragmatism question of like cutting corners or lying or saying things that don't like add up in the end or cause further problems. And then how does this relate to pressures and need and relative need and everything. So all right, so I mean, earlier like a little bit ago, I mean, I was reflecting through all these things. I was like stressing out. I was feeling all these feelings that I've only felt like at certain points, in terms of like freak out, shame and guilt, pressure, terror, thinking through all these potential like worst case scenarios, thinking different things I wrote up last year, including this idea of this reality show concept and this idea of like going out onto the streets. And it's like there's the whole idea of like asking for help and trying to promote an idea, but then it's like, who else is doing that? And this gets into Mark Horvath, and then possibly contacting him and then talking about this whole thing where it's like he has this thing where he gives out socks and videotapes people and meets people. But it's like, how can these recordings be turned into maybe profiles that are tied into some kind of like a microfinance type of a thing,